What is happening, guys? Acrinator here, and welcome to another episode of World of Warcraft Dungeon Overview. Last episode we got a look at Wailing Caverns, and this episode we're going to take a look into the surprisingly detailed story of Shadowfang Keep. I'm going to be running through it with my level 100 Feral Worgen Druid right there, and with that being said, let's get straight into it. Shadowfang Keep is a level 16 to 21 dungeon with a Cataclysm revamped level 85 heroic mode. It's located in southern Silverpine Forest, which could be pretty tricky for any Alliance players trying to walk there. If you follow the path I'm taking here, you should have a minimal amount of problems with unwanted aggro on the journey. It's a bit of a walk, but it's all necessary if you don't want to waltz right into horde PvP marked guards that could one-shot you in a heartbeat. Up until the Third War, Shadowfang Keep was an Alliance stronghold overlooking the small town of Pyrewood. Though it wasn't originally called Shadowfang Keep, its original name is never given for players to know. During the Scourge's death march throughout Eastern Kingdoms in the Third War, many soldiers lost their lives and were then resurrected to bolster the undead's ranks. The Archmage of Dalaran at the time, Arugal, especially became frustrated over losing so many mages to the Scourge. Pushed to the edge, Arugal called upon extra-dimensional beings to combat the undead menace. The Savage Worgen originating from the Emerald Dream did help fight off the Scourge, however when the fighting was done, they immediately turned on those who had summoned them. Ravaging the land surrounding Dalaran, the Worgen eventually made their way to the small town of Pyrewood as well as the keep of the noble Baron Silverlane. Arugal was driven mad by what he'd unleashed, adopting the Worgen as his, quote, children, and retreated to Silverlane's now ruined stronghold, now dubbed Shadowfang Keep. The Banshee Queen Sylvanas Windrunner sent agents to investigate Shadowfang Keep during the early events of World of Warcraft, trying to free Silverpine Forest from the Worgen menace. They eventually found out about Arugal, and the Forsaken Commander ordered his death. Fast forward to Cataclysm, and Shadowfang Keep is now part of a very different story than its original tale. Not getting too caught up in the details just yet, let's just say that former Gilnean noble Lord Vincent Godfrey committed suicide after a failed attempt at treason against King Gen Greymane, was resurrected by the Forsaken, betrayed Sylvanas, and now has both the Alliance and Horde bearing down on Shadowfang Keep. Don't worry, we'll get into the juicier parts of the story when we get to Godfrey's boss fight, but for now there are still 4 bosses to go through before that. The first boss of Shadowfang Keep is Baron Ashbury. Ashbury was one of 2 Eastern Gilnean noblemen who went along with Lord Godfrey's act of treason against Gen Greymane. He inevitably was killed by the Gilnean Worgen trying to rescue their king. Shortly after, Ashbury was resurrected by the Forsaken and served them alongside Godfrey. The first act of treason mustn't have been enough for Ashbury and his former Gilnean companions, because they ended their short-lived servitude to the Banshee Queen with yet another act of treason. Ashbury then fled to Shadowfang Keep with his master, waiting for the opportunity to cause the maximum amount of pain and suffering to any adventurers foolish enough to enter their domain. During his fight, Ashbury will periodically cast Asphyxiate, throwing all players into the air, stunning them, and bringing them to 1 health. After he's done casting Asphyxiate, Ashbury will channel Stay of Execution, healing players for 10% of their health every second, however healing himself for 5% of his maximum health as well. This ability can and probably should be interrupted as soon as possible. Ashbury will also cast Racking Pain on all players within 60 yards, which, considering the close quarters of this fight, will be everyone. Racking Pain inflicts shadow damage and increases vulnerability to future shadow damage by 20% for 2 minutes. It should also be noted that this effect stacks. At 25% health, Ashbury will cast Calamity, inflicting shadow damage to all players, increasing the damage by 1% every second until either he is killed or the group wipes. Pretty unforgiving if you ask me. The second boss of Shadowfang Keep is Baron Silverlane. Baron Silverlane was the former lord of the keep before it was given the name of Shadowfang, until he was killed by Archmage Arugal and his Worgen. His spirit now haunts the dining hall of the keep, accompanied by a few of his undead servants. During the fight, Silverlane will curse his current target with Veil of Shadow, reducing healing received by 50% for 8 seconds. He can also cast Cursed Veil, inflicting shadow damage onto all players and decreasing their healing received by 75% for 8 seconds. At 90%, 60%, and 30% health, Silverlane will randomly summon one of 4 Worgen spirits. Overall, the Worgen themselves don't have any notable mechanics, but they must be taken down before focus is brought back to the main boss. If they're allowed to stack, things can get messy for the latter part of the encounter. The third boss of Shadowfang Keep is Commander Springvale. Springvale's lore is relatively simplistic, being that he was just a paladin who served under Baron Silverlane when Arugal's worgen attacked the keep. His spirit still remains in the council room with some of his soldiers as ghostly forms. During the fight, Springvale will periodically cast Desecration, an AoE effect in a 6 yards radius around him, damaging players inside the ring for shadow damage and slowing them for 50% of their normal movement speed. This next ability is actually pretty cruel depending on who is unlucky enough to grab it. Springvale will cast Word of Shame on a random enemy once he's generated 3 unholy power. Word of Shame deals 5% of the player's health every 3 seconds until either they die or the boss is defeated. Springvale will start out the fight with 2 different adds next to him, and they'll periodically rejoin the fight at random intervals, even after being killed. These are relatively simple and just need to be the priority of the fight until they are taken down, leaving only Springvale to fight. The 4th boss of Shadowfang Keep is Lord Walden. Remember how I said that there were 2 Eastern Gilnean noblemen who accompanied Godfrey throughout all his ordeals with Greymane and Sylvanas? Well, the second lord was Walden. During the fight, Lord Walden will periodically summon a mystery toxin cauldron for 10 seconds with a random concoction inside. However, at 35% health, he summons a cauldron of Toxic Catalyst instead. Toxic Catalyst deals fire damage to enemies every 2 seconds and increases the target's chance for critical strikes by 100% for 10 seconds. Every 3 seconds, Walden applies Toxic Coagulant to players standing near his cauldron. This applies a DOT on players and decreases their movement speed by 10% for 6 seconds. This effect can stack up to 3 times, causing players to be stunned for 5 seconds when this happens. However, jumping/moving around can stop the effect from stacking and will be removed. The 5th and final boss of Shadowfang Keep is Lord Godfrey. Now for the real backbone of the newly revived story of Shadowfang Keep. Lord Vincent Godfrey was a renegade Gilnean nobleman who opposed King Gen Greymane's support of citizens affected by the worgen curse, believing that it should be purged from the land instead. During the climax of the worgen starting area for players, Godfrey takes Greymane captive and attempts to turn him over to the Banshee Queen Sylvanas Windrunner in order to stop the violence between Gilneans and the Forsaken. Godfrey's plans are ultimately stopped by the players with the assistance of Darius Crowley. When it is revealed that Gen Greymane himself was afflicted with the worgen curse, Godfrey jumps off a cliff, saying that he'd rather die than having a worgen as king. His peace from death didn't last very long, however, as Sylvanas' Valkyr resurrected Godfrey and the 2 former noblemen, Walden and Ashbury, to serve the Forsaken. Godfrey was then tasked with taking out the Gilnean resistance then set up in Pyrowood Village, being led by Darius Crowley. Based in Shadowfang Keep, Godfrey eventually manages to capture Crowley's daughter, Lorna, and holds her captive, threatening to turn her into a Forsaken if Crowley didn't give himself up. Sylvanas had never intended any harm to come to Lorna, just using her as a tool to stop the violence towards her people, whereas Godfrey would have rather killed and raised her as a Forsaken regardless of what Crowley did. Just as Crowley surrenders to Sylvanas at the shattered remains of Greymane Wall, Godfrey betrays the Banshee Queen by shooting her in the back, killing her temporarily, while her Valkyr attempted to save her from hell. This final act of defiance has labeled Godfrey as a wanted man not only by the Alliance, but by the Horde as well, causing the entire world to bear down on him and his companions. They've now barricaded themselves inside Shadowfang Keep, preparing for the inevitable onslaught. During the fight, Lord Godfrey will periodically pick a random player and shoot them with cursed bullets, dealing shadow damage as well as leaving a shadow damage DOT that ticks every 3 seconds for 15 seconds. Godfrey will also unleash Pistol Barrage in a 60-degree cone towards a random player, dealing potentially lethal damage to anyone unlucky enough to be caught in his range. Bloodthirsty ghouls will be spawned periodically throughout the fight, but they can be ignored for the most part, as they don't really do too much to constitute any sort of priority. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed that episode, and maybe even learned something new about Shadowfang Keep. Next Dungeon Overview episode, we'll be going over Black Fathom Depths, so for all of you out there who haven't done that dungeon since before Cataclysm, you'll probably be surprised about all the changes that have been brought about. So, as always, leave your comments in the comment section below if you want me to play anything like more World of Warcraft, more Ion, more Borderlands, more Sniper Elite 2, more Path of Exile, or anything else that you could possibly think of. And the comment question still stands. Try and get the intro and outro songs to my videos. They're always the same. I never change them. Be sure to check out my partner in crime, Sir John Mac's channel. He posts something every now and then. It's usually pretty entertaining, whatever it is. Be sure to follow me on Instagram if you want the latest updates on when I'll be uploading videos and when I will start streaming on Twitch. So there is that. And be sure to like and subscribe to my videos. It sure mean a lot. And that's all the time I got for today, guys. So until next time, don't die.